Hey everybody, it's your old pal Mike. I hope you're happy, healthy, and safe. Welcome back to the channel for this episode of On the Bench, and let me tell you, it's a very special episode. Before we begin, a very special shout out to my supporters on Patreon. If you are interested in finding out how you too can support the channel, click the link in the description down below. On the bench right now, I've got a fantastic 1959 Fender Duo Sonic. This is absolutely one of my favorite old Fender guitar models, and I am so excited to have this one on the bench, not just because of what it is, but because of to whom it belongs. I mentioned in a previous update video that culinary mastermind Alton Brown had sent me a few guitars. Two of those guitars were from the fantastic Built company out of Des Moines, Iowa. Absolutely one of my favorite small builders on the market. Do check them out if you like weird, wonderful offset guitars. Now I'll link to that update video below if you want to find out more about the work I did to them, but the third guitar that Alton sent me is this delightful little Duo Sonic. And I do mean little. This guitar has the 22.5-inch neck that was common at the time of production, and oh, it is just so much fun to play. And yeah, it's very short. I mean, playing this neck is an experience, especially if you're used to full-scale Fenders, 25.5 inches. This is a full 3 inches shorter, and oh, it's a lot of fun, especially when you string these guys up with 12s, 13s. A super heavy string gauge really does a lot to tighten these guitars up, and I cannot wait to get to that point. But it is going to take a while before we get to the stringing phase because, well, we've got some work ahead of us. Now you can already tell that this guitar has about 1/3 of its original desert sand finish left, and that is unfortunate. Looks like somebody started the process of refinishing this and just never finished. However, we're not going to be addressing the finish at all, maybe a polish, but there are a few problems that I will be addressing, and number one was taking care of this bridge. When this guitar first showed up at my door, this bridge was a rusty mess. I mean, it was disgusting. I addressed this off camera using my usual kitchen ingredient solution to rust, which is simply soaking the parts for a period of time in distilled white vinegar. I really only gave this bridge about an hour and a half in the vinegar bath, but it came out looking beautiful. Now I did this off camera because it's a lot of waiting around, a lot of scrubbing, and I've already shown it on the channel. So if you're interested in the specifics of that procedure, do check out my Refit and Restore series, episode 2, where I do the very same operation to a 1961 Jazzmaster in full detail. Links to that in the description below. I am also going to be taking a look at the electronics just to make sure that everything is performing the way that it should. There are no obvious problems, there are no scratchy pots, everything seems to be working well. I will also be replacing the bridge ground connection, but more on that later. Now the most pressing issue that this guitar has is with the headstock. When this guitar first came to me, I noticed immediately that the tuners were not operating the way that they should be. Not only were they sort of difficult to tune, and I thought initially that was because of maintenance or upkeep, but the high E tuner especially was incredibly sloppy. You could almost do a full turn before this thing would engage, and part of that was due to the casing having come loose. It's actually a common problem with old Clouson tuners where the back of the casing and these little metal tabs on either side of the tuning shaft, well, they're really what's holding the tuner together. When those get loose, the whole thing stops working correctly. You can spin this, and it won't engage the gears. So, yeah, I really did think I was going to have to replace this, and I was not sure that hammering these back into place was going to do the trick. But I am happy to say that I was able to save this tuner. Hammering the tabs back into place actually worked out perfectly, and this thing is secure and perfect. Like, it works exactly the way it should. However, there was more to this problem than meets the eye. It wasn't simply that the tuner was malfunctioning. There was actually a problem with the headstock. Now, looking at the headstock, this just appears to be a normal Duo Sonic headstock. Nothing untoward, right? However, I'm going to flip it over so that you can see the holes for the tuning shaft. Now, one of the main contributing factors to the tuner issues that were going on was actually these holes for the shafts to pass through. And the reason that we're having problems is that this wood, over time, has constricted around the tuning shaft. And when I go to press this back in, I mean, my God, it's so tight. It absolutely, like, I am pressing with quite a lot of force, and it really does not want to let that tuner through. The wood is constricted around the tuning shaft to such a degree that it is preventing the tuner from turning. And you can see I'm turning the knob, and the tuner itself is turning, and that is no good for tuning stability and no good for functionality. That will increase the likelihood of tuner failure. So what I'm going to have to do, oh geez, if I can get this back out again, yeah, I'm going to have to widen these holes. Now to fix this issue, we're going to do it the old-fashioned way. Using a hand drill, but wait, before you protest, we're going to be reverse drilling to gently widen these holes. And what I mean by reverse drilling is simply putting the drill in reverse. Reverse drilling is a common and gentle way of widening a hole without worrying about going too far or gripping the wood or cutting into it, because the drill bit is reversed. It's not the cutting surface that's doing the work. It's really just the shape of the bit itself. So I'm going to use my hand drill to very carefully widen these holes. Now I could use a peg head reamer, I could use a number of other tools, but this I've found is one of the safest and easiest ways to do this job. And I also like doing it this way because the bit is going to be fully guided by the hole that's already there. I'm not cutting into the wood, I'm simply widening it. So this is going to work out just fine. Let's check the fit. Perfect. That's exactly what I want to see. Perfect. Perfect. Yep. Yep. That is exactly what I want to see. And that's it. That's all there is to it. It is such a simple and safe and fast procedure to get the job done right. Now that I've gotten that taken care of quickly, I'm going to reinstall the tuner bushings. All right, I'm just going to gently place the tuner bushings in their holes. And their holes happen to be the right size still. The wood hasn't constricted there, so it's just going to take moderate amount of pressure to put them back. And I don't think I'll have to worry about the holes constricting or causing issues down the line, although, you know, wood is unpredictable. It's impossible to say for sure. And to press them in, I'm just going to use an Irwin quick grip here. Press these bad boys back in their homes. Yes, it's looking good. Yep. No problems on the back of that headstock, although it is sort of dirty, huh? Oh yeah, this wants to be clean. You want to be clean! I love maintaining vintage instruments. Keeping these guitars clean and shiny and healthy, it's the most rewarding thing I've ever done with myself. Aside from my Data cosplay, I'm a very good Data. I think it's time to reinstall the tuners. Oh, and they glide right through. This is exactly what I wanted. Just gonna put these screws back in their places. Doesn't really matter where. And I'm going to gently turn them in, but not the whole way, because I want to make sure that I'm taking care to line them up nicely. Got ourselves some tuners. Very excited. Alright, so the next thing I'd like to do is clean up this fretboard. Before I use steel wool on this fretboard, I'm going to tape off just the neck pickup, because I don't want to risk any steel wool fibers getting on that. And as I've said before, if you're going to use steel wool on a fretboard, which is fine to use, it's a fine way to clean frets and remove gunk from rosewood, just make sure you're doing a side-to-side motion and not up and down the neck, because you're going to leave tiny scratches in the frets that you're going to hear every time you bend. Plus it just shines up nicer. And there's definitely some gunk and grime on this board, so I am using moderate pressure. These frets are in really nice shape, though, overall. A little bit of wear in the first position, but that's very common for these student model instruments. There's nothing I love more than old rosewood. I really cannot wait for Alton to get this guitar back. I think it's going to be just a night and day difference. He is absolutely one of my heroes when it comes to edutainment, or whatever the word is. You know, he's made a career out of explaining gently how to cook, how to season, how to do things with food that will blow your mind. And well, between him and Julia Childs and Bob Ross and Adam Savage, I feel like I've got a lot of really great examples to look up to when it comes to sharing information about guitar repair and maintenance. All right, that looks really nicely polished. The last thing I'll do is use a little bit of oil on this rosewood. Oh, look at that! Oh, I'll never get tired of this reveal. Seeing the chocolatey look. Beautiful vintage rosewood. Oh my god. Yeah, you're going to be much happier after this job is done. Now, we are going to be cutting a nut on this one. Will I do it on camera this time? Who knows? Stay tuned! I think we're ready to dig into the electronics. And this pick guard lifts right off because there's no through body ground connection. Interesting fact on Jazz Masters, Jaguars, Duosonics, Music Masters, the ground connection to the bridge was actually made via a string, a really thick string, usually a G, or like solid core wire, whatever was available. But they would lay it under the bridge, screw the bridge down, and then that would make contact with the shield on the back of the pick guard, which would complete the ground connection. It's a fine way of doing it. There's nothing wrong with it. There's only one changed part here, and that is the green wire added, probably to make the ground connection, but I'm assuming it's redundant. There's no real reason for it. Maybe just someone thought it was missing. This missing one is the far more integral ground connection, so I'm going to replace that when it's time to put the bridge back on. And in fact, why don't I just do that now while we're at it? I thought I had a piece of wire ready to go, but it looks like, oh, there you are. I knew I had you somewhere. Doesn't need to be that long. Yeah, I think I'm going to take a little bit off of that guy and lay it right down where the old one was. Now this is a little thicker than the G string that was probably used originally, so I am gonna just gently hammer it into that little channel to make it deeper so that the bridge isn't popping up on one side when we screw it down. If I can just get it to sit there right where I want it. Okay. Alright, we've got our thicker screw head. And we'll finish this by hand. Really tighten it down. Make sure everybody is secure. And we are good to go. Switch feels good. Pots are turning nicely. I actually did plug this in earlier just to make sure that it wasn't scratchy or anything, and everything felt pretty good to me, so I did lubricate the switch. The switch was a little sticky, but just a little bit of this CRC precision lubricant brought it right back to life, so I'm pretty happy with that. Yeah, I would say that this is ready to go. There's no real reason for me to remove this added ground. If anything, it's a little bit of security, and all the solder joints look pretty good to me, so I don't think I'm going to change a darn thing about this. I think I'm just going to screw it right back on. Really, the main thing was I just wanted to get that ground connection squared away. That was the thing I was most concerned with. The nut was actually broken when it came here, and it is not the original. This is a replacement plastic nut. So I am going to be replacing this. I've got a brand new unbleached bone blank that I'm going to be cutting into a very cool new nut. Now to prep this nut, I'm going to make sure that I have it sized appropriately for the channel that it will be sitting in. And it is the correct 7 1/4 radius on the bottom, so that should fit nicely. But I am going to have to remove just a little material from the sides to make it fit down in. So let's take care of that. Now it is really close, so I think I'm going to be able to get away with just some light sanding. Got some paper here. I'm just going to gently remove some material. And check as I go. And in fact, I'm going to get out my calipers and just measure. I'll be aiming for 3.1, and I'm at 3.2 and 3.3 on that side. So let's press a little harder on the side that's thicker. Get rid of just a little bit more material there. That's much better. And that is sitting nicely. I feel pretty good about that. Generally at this point, I will continue to size the nut for the neck itself, bring in the sides so that it's not sticking out on either side of that neck. What I want to do first is I want to make sure I get some of this material off the top because it is much taller than it needs to be. And I don't want the nut to be extremely tall, otherwise it's going to feel uncomfortable when you get into the root positions. So in order to figure out the minimum height that I want these nut slots to be at, I've got this pencil that I've flattened on a belt sander. I'm going to put it on the first fret and just mark the height of that first fret. Just like that. And that is telling me the height of the first fret so that I don't go so low that the strings are going to hit it as they vibrate. I'm also going to go ahead and mark the sides of the neck so that I can make sure that my nut is the right width. And I'm going to take it to the belt sander real quick and size it. I just took off a little bit of material from the sides as well as the top. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to string it up with 2 strings, the outer E's, so that I can see how they fall on either side of the fretboard. And this is precisely the reason that I keep a set of terrible strings. I could use thread of some kind, as I do to line up a Bigsby or a vibrato that I'm installing, but for this, I just wanted to use strings, and this doesn't need to be nearly that long. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I think these are the strings from the vibrato position video that I've kept around for this purpose. So I'm just gonna string it up as I normally would and just see how they line up naturally, and that looks pretty good to me. Oh, and this tuner is turning so much better than it was when it first showed up. Very, very happy with that. So when we do this, and this looks like an A neck, 1.5 inches. So judging by the wear, I think I'm just going to mark it there. Mark either side of the string so that I can get my nut file in the middle. A lot of techs will use a string spacing guide to help mark their locations, but generally I like to size this up by eye alone. And the gauges are fine. If you use a gauge, that's a fine way to do it. It's just that many of them are a sort of graduated spacing where the plain strings are a little bit closer together and the wound strings are farther apart. The strings get slightly farther apart as you go across the fretboard, and I don't like the feel of that. I've never enjoyed that, so, I just prefer to go my own way. Now I'm going to use my 12 file here just to rough in the locations. And that is because I'm just going to make a shallow cut so that I can put them in the place where they belong and judge that. That's too close to the edge. And if I make shallow cuts, I can very easily adjust that to my taste. Yeah, I'm feeling good about that. So I'm going to deepen these slots for the gauges just a little bit further. And I'm just making them deep enough so that when I remove more material from the top of the nut blank that they won't disappear on me. That's looking pretty good. Let's string it up with the others. Okay, I have strung the guitar up with the inner 4 courses, and I've roughed in the nut slots just a little bit, and I'm actually really happy with where these all are sitting. I think I am going to bring the B in just a little bit, or I could bring the G in and space out the low strings a little more, but they feel really nicely placed. Nice and equidistant from one another, not too cramped. Yeah, it feels really nice to me. So I think I'm just going to bring the B in and call that good, and then move on with the polishing phase. Close my eyes for a few seconds. And then look. I think I'm going to bring the low E over just a wee bit. Yeah, that's a lot nicer. That E did look a little cramped. And we're talking like nanometers at this point. We're moving the strings in a nearly imperceptible manner. And that is, once again, the fault of my obsessive compulsive disorder, which I've mentioned many times on the channel. And it often manifests as, you know, me spending probably an hour staring at string spacing. So I probably should just get myself a rule and be done with it. But this is the process. Yeah, I'm going to bring that B over just a bit using my 0.20 side. Oh, it looks a lot nicer, I think. And now I think I'm ready to start addressing depth. Now, the safest way to choose the depth of your nut slots is to use feeler gauges right here next to the nut, sized appropriately so that there's enough clearance over the first fret for the strings to vibrate freely. That is a surefire way to build a little dam past which you cannot saw into the bone material. It's really safe. I don't have feeler gauges, so I just end up doing this by feel alone. And so it pays to work very slowly here. So we're going to just saw in until I'm happy with the overall height. And we've got plenty of material to work with here, so I don't foresee a problem. And when you're cutting a nut, it pays to angle toward the tuner that the string is going to be anchored to, because you want a nice, smooth, uninterrupted flow from bridge up the neck to the tuner. I feel pretty good about that height. So let's get the A depth ironed out, and we're going to finalize this later. Yeah, that'll do. That's where we'll stop for now. Finalizing slot depth is probably the last thing that I do in the whole process. I just like to make sure that I've got the nut squared away, you know, cut, sized, polished, all of that, before I finalize the depth. 32. I'm going to go with a slightly heavier gauge of string on this with the ultra short neck. I think that's going to pull the whole thing together, make it sound a lot bigger, a lot tighter, and reduce string rattle. Oh yeah, you're cutting nicely. Yeah, I think we're going to stop there. Moving on to the G, and I might need to widen that later, depending on what gauge I choose. I haven't quite decided if I'm going to go for 11s or 12s. Yeah. And I'm going to finalize the bottom of that slot real quick, because sometimes it's just nicer to finish with a slightly smaller gauge so that your string stays put in the bottom of its slot. You use the 20 on the B. We're going to finish it off with the 12. Oh yeah, that looks great. And the 12 is very proud off the fretboard. And remember, we're just going for height at this point, not shape of the saddle slot, or the nut slot, rather. Alright, I'm satisfied with that. I'm going to pull the nut off, remove some material from the top, and then we're going to come back, size it, and polish it. And it's just a matter of working slowly and checking that work. Yeah, almost. A little bit off of both sides. I also like to gently round off the corners of the nut so that it's impossible to feel when you get to the root position. Yeah. All right, I feel pretty good about that. Now that I've got the width ironed out, I'm going to take the rest of the height off on the belt sander. Now remember, we still have plenty to go as far as overall height of the strings. So I think it's going to work out quite nicely. Hey everybody, I'm down here now. I've removed a little more material on the bass side than I have from the treble side because it's good to not have the strings completely covered by high walls of bone. But when it comes to the plain strings, well, if you find that your guitar has a tendency for those to skip out of the saddle slots, you do want a little bit more height surrounding them. All right, I'm very happy with this nut so far. Let's move on to the polishing phase. Everybody's got a different technique, and to that point, there are a few things that I like to do for comfort. Number one, obviously I make sure the sides are flush with that of the neck, and as I mentioned, I round off the corners a little bit so that you don't feel them. I also make sure that these shoulders are nicely rounded so that you don't feel those. As for the portion of the nut that faces your hand, I like to round that edge off just a little bit so that it's smooth. So that if you happen to touch it with your fingers, you're not going to feel it. It's not going to be an unpleasant experience. But that's just something that I do for comfort that I like to think about. A little bit of 220 action, which will remove some material. So in earlier steps, it does pay to have the thing slightly larger than it needs to be. I'll move on to 400. Got a little pad of 600 here. I'm going to use to continue removing these scratches from the grittier papers. And you can start to see the bone shining just a little bit. And that is what we're going for. We are going to make this bone sparkle. All right, that looks pretty good. Got this old-ass piece of 800 here. Oh, that's looking nice. Okay. A piece of 1000 here. And at this point, I'm going to pull out my old friends, micro mesh polishing pads. These are amazing little gadgets that help you polish out nuts or frets or even like spot filling finish issues. These things are great for that. Yeah, look at that. Nice and smooth. First one starts at 1500 grit, and then it goes all the way up to 12,000, which is plenty shiny. Starting to get a nice little shine on that. Oh yeah, now for 12,000. Is it focusing on that? Anyway, that's going to do the trick. I am going to pop this back into place, and we're going to take care of those nut slots. Get them finalized. Now what I'm looking for when it comes to nut slots and playability is I want the strings to have a smooth surface over which to run down the neck, and I want them to be high enough that they clear the first fret, but low enough that when you press them down, you're not pulling the guitar out of tune. Something that a lot of companies don't pay attention to. From the factory, nuts are often cut a little too high, I believe, and that can mean, yeah, pulling sharp every time you hit an E chord or an F. Let's find the appropriate file and start going for it. We'll just check height. Yep. Keep going. Let's stick with that. B. I'm going to use the 20 side of this StewMac file for depth. That looks pretty good to me, and we're going to finish off with the 12 side because the B string is smaller. Yep. Oh yeah, it's looking good. Let's leave that. I have the sense that I'm going to go heavier, so I'm going to use a 32 on this D. Perfect. Let's get the 42 for the A. Okay, I am back. I have finalized the nut slots. I have strung the guitar up with the strings that I felt would be most appropriate for its size and sound, and that is Ernie Ball Beefy Slinkies, gauges 11 to 54. And I went with this gauge specifically because, let's say you put 10 to 46, a fairly standard gauge of string, on the 22.5-inch neck, it's gonna feel real splashy. And also for the fact that at the time this guitar was made, really heavy flat wound strings were the order of the day. We didn't have rounds widely available until Ernie Ball came along. So yeah, I went with a heavier gauge of string. I am still deciding whether or not I want to use a wound third on this one. Now the intonation on this is pretty great, and that is partly because of the string gauge and also partly because of the way I set up guitars that have a 3-saddle bridge. Word to the wise, intonation is a function of string height as well as saddle position. So if you play with the string heights a little bit, you fudge the radius, you can get this to stay in tune beautifully all the way up the neck. I'm not even sure if it's sort of pretty good, right? Not perfect. I'm not done yet, but we're going to keep working on it. At this point in the process, all I have left to do is intonation and a final clean and polish to get all my fingerprints off of this very abused body. There's so little finish left on this thing. Did I show you this earlier? About a third gone, all of it gone. Have I been saying his name correctly?
Scientists discovered some people have a secret pooping habit that keeps them effortlessly thin, even with...
What an unfortunate ad.
Hey, Alton Brown here.
Alton! All of the work I did on Alton's guitar, well, it went really well, and I could not be prouder of the transformation here. Like I said, when the guitar first came in, the bridge was rusted out, a total mess. Felt really bad on the hand. Not fun at all to play. There were 5 strings on there because the nut had been broken, so the new one is polished up and perfectly tuned in, honed in for the way it might be played. The tuners were having such trouble staying in tune, and that was because of, constriction due to shrinking wood, but also this high E tuner was exploded, and that's no good for anybody. So, yeah, I'm really happy with this. And I think Alton's going to be really happy with it too. Now, if you didn't know, Alton Brown actually, he not only plays guitar, but he plays guitar in his touring show, which is actually coming back, believe it or not. So if you're interested to find out more about his touring show, link in the description below. Now, I'm still not done. I've got to finish the intonation on this bridge, but it's pretty good to begin with. I just can't wait to get this back in his hands. This whole project has been delightful, and I am honestly blown away that Alton Brown would trust me with his very cool instrument. So Alton, thank you so much. Why don't we plug it in and hear what it sounds like before I pack it up and ship it back? These shorties, just can't get enough of them. What a unique character. And truly, I cannot say enough nice things about this guitar, whether it's the weight, the chocolatey rosewood fretboard. Oh, and I'm a big fan of this nut width at 1.5 inches. That's right, it qualifies as a bona fide member of the Skinny Nut Club. Say it with me, Skinny Nuts! Anyway, that about wraps it up for this episode of On the Bench, featuring Alton Brown's 59 Duosonic. Ugh, what a wild ride. I hope this video has been informative and helpful to those of you who are interested in guitar repair and maintenance, and maybe you've got an ultra short scale Duosonic or Music Master of your own, and you want to figure out how to make it the best it can be. Well, hopefully this has been helpful to you. In any case, thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate you liking, sharing, commenting, for subscribing, for all of that good stuff, and a special shout out to my supporters on Patreon. Y'all are straight killing it over there. I am so grateful for your support as I delve into the mysteries of these old guitars that have stories and pasts and have seen some shit, man. Why did they do this? Who did this? Who tried to strip this great finish? Desert Sand rules. Oh, anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you're taking care of yourselves and each other, and we'll see you in the next one.